Today, I just wanted to talk about what I think a lot of people might not want to hear, and that is what is currently too good about the engineer, and what I think should be done to change that. Along with that, I'd also like to talk about what is currently too weak about the engineer, so it's not going to be as much as a slam on my own favorite class, as much as it's going to be more of a harsh but truthful look at what the engineer needs to be a fairly balanced class for the current state of TF2, in my opinion. Now, there are two main things that I want to talk about regarding the Engie, and that is the engineer's role in TF2 and the engineer's weapons. First, his role, which is what the engineer as a class brings to the table as far as his main abilities and how it can contribute to the average team. The first thing I want to make clear about the engineer as a class is this: the engineer will never be and should never be the best class in TF2. The way the class is designed is not to be a constant force to be reckoned with. It's supposed to be a support class with a focus on area denial and team sustainability. I compare the engineer's tier placement situation with that of the spy. Very similarly, if the spy were to be the most powerful class in the game, TF2 would not be very fun. The spy can't be the best class because of the way the class is designed. He's meant to be a silent, sneaky killer who takes advantage of windows of opportunity to get important kills that will end up changing the tide of the game. The engineer is supposed to help his team achieve victory using his various buildings, mainly by helping shut down key areas from easy access and essentially create an obstacle for the enemy to attempt to penetrate. If the engineer was too powerful, the game would be slowed down to a halt and the entire game would become Choke Point Push Simulator 2017. So basically, the engineer needs to be weaker than the average class by default, and then becomes stronger the longer he's able to freely set up his buildings, and then even when he's finally at his most effective, then he should be able to be countered with effective coordination, which for the most part the TF team has this down, but there are a few cracks in this, which I will get into right now. First thing being the main issue I see with the engineer. He's too easy to be effective with when stacking multiple engineers on defense. You've seen it countless times. Your team gets pushed back to Badwater last, and everyone on red team does the thing that is most guaranteed to win them the round. They respawn with 6 engineers and build a ton of level 3 sentries, all spread out in a formation that is almost impossible to destroy in just one push. As it stands, stacking engineers in defensive situations is simply too strong, and something needs to be done about it. The easy solution would be to impose class limits on casual servers, but we all know that that wouldn't go over very well with anyone, so I suggest Valve make it so engineers cannot interact with each other's buildings. This includes not being able to heal, upgrade, remove sappers from, or take metal from other engineers' buildings. Yes, I can't believe I'm doing this either. I am suggesting the removal of cooperative engineering entirely, so that it's much harder for multiple engineers to quickly set up and sustain a giant beehive of sentries and dispensers that is simply just too large to take down. But I believe it needs to be done for the greater enjoyment of the game. The second thing about the engineer as a class is that he's too centered around his sentry gun and a defensive role in general. I personally think that when it comes to defensive capabilities, every class in TF2 should be very light in that department, and right now, the engineer is one of the most effective defenders in the game. When you have classes that are too good at defending, the game slows down to a crawl and it becomes less and less exciting for everyone involved. And while I do think that there should be classes that are better at defending, just like how there should be classes that are better at attacking, I don't think one type of style should be more powerful than the other. The attacking classes and the defending classes should be constantly in a back and forth with each other, not a recurring situation where the attacking classes have to throw everything they have at a single defending class in order to effectively take him down. And that's what I think is currently a little too strong about the engineer, his defending capabilities. I would much rather the TF team slowly nerf the defensive tools that the engineer currently has at his disposal, and in return buff his supportive capabilities. This means making things like sentry guns more easily countered and making his dispenser more of a focus, as well as allow the engineer more options for his team sustainability. My ideal buffs to the support Engie would be to make him into a more viable healer, almost on par with the medic. Right now, the medic is hands down the most powerful class in the game. If your team doesn't have a medic and the other team does, you are very likely to lose. No other class has the ability to heal, which seems a little unfair. I'm of the opinion that the more team class compositions that are effective, the more interesting and varied the metagame will become. So having a class in the game that is literally a must pick if you want to win, it kind of ruins that variation a little bit. I would suggest making the engineer have something that allows him to heal on demand, just like a medic, such as a dispenser backpack, like the one that I suggested in a weapon ideas video back, I don't know, like a year ago. I also completely support the idea that Banny has suggested for a year now, which is a replacement for the teleporter that is essentially a speed pad which allows players to walk over and gain a temporary speed boost. This would be more effective for maps where the spawn point changes so often that setting up a teleporter entrance and exit is just not worth the hassle. In general, making the engineer into a more effective and mobile combat class when he needs to be is a step in the right direction, which is why I think the gunslinger is one of the better unlocks for the engineer, just because it allows him to focus more on supporting rather than defending. In my eyes, I think the engineer should be nearly on par with the medic as far as healing goes, so that you have the option of running one of the two available healers, or even both of them for extra sustainability. I think that overall, the medic should be dethroned of his role of the one and only healer, and I believe that engineer could be in an ideal spot to fill that position. So moving on from the changes that should be made to the engineer as a class, we can talk a bit about the engineer's weapons. For the most part, the engineer has a lot of reasonably balanced unlocks. Pretty much all of his melee weapons are useful and not horribly over or underpowered in any way, in my opinion. But then we get into his secondaries. I have a bit of an issue with one weapon. You might know exactly what that is. The Wrangler. Oh, did you think I was going to say the short circuit? Because I actually think the short circuit is pretty much fine in its design. You know, in a world where spamming pills, stickies, and rockets is a cheap and easy way to spread damage, the engineer having a small timing-based answer to that doesn't seem all that ridiculous to me. You know, if the pyro can do the exact same thing, except actually do massive amounts of damage as a result, I don't really understand why giving the engineer the ability to prevent a few rockets from hitting him should be that much of a problem. And the short circuit is also a great spy checker for when you want to track down an invisible Frenchman, and really useful for finishing off a jumpy scout in a 1v1 fight. The only issue that I have with the short circuit is how freely you're able to use it, which comes from the fact that it's dependent on your metal supply. I would much rather the short circuit either had its own ammo and you had to reload it after using it so many times, or if it had its own cooldown bar so that spamming it over and over while sitting on an infinite metal source like a dispenser or a payload cart is discouraged, and instead force engineers to use their timing to prevent damage or put out a bit of AoE. But back to the Wrangler, this thing is hands down the biggest culprit when it comes to the overpowered defensive capabilities of the engineer. And I'm not talking about the fact that it can allow you to take manual control of your sentry gun, I'm talking about the resistance shield. When you so much as just take out the Wrangler, it changes the effective health of a level 3 sentry gun from 216 health to just under 650 health. This basically makes the Wrangler a brain-dead, easy way to sponge damage and waste time when a push is made against your sentry, and especially in a low team size environment where incoming damage is going to be lessened by a significant amount by default compared to full 12v12 servers, the Wrangler is the ultimate defensive tool for the engineer. Now, you already know that I do not want the engineer to be a powerhouse of defending, so right away, my main suggested change would be to completely remove the shield from the Wrangler. Now, of course, this would be a significant nerf to not only the engineer's defensive ability, but also to the Wrangler as a weapon, because while the ability to manually take control of your sentry gun is a very powerful tool, I have a feeling that straight up removing the best thing about the Wrangler would cause a lot of complaints. So I suggest counterbalancing the removal of the Wrangler's most overpowered feature with moving the damage resistance from the sentry to the engineer himself. I don't know exactly how much would be fair, but in my eyes, if the engineer is able to freely use the Wrangler to pressure a sniper who is attempting to shoot his gun out of the auto-aim's range and not have to worry about getting quickscoped for 150 damage, I think that that would be enough. And even if that seems like too much, my final suggestion would be to make it so that the Wrangler allows the engineer to take very little or no self-damage from his own sentry gun. This would make the very fun and flashy, yet pretty much useless strategy of sentry jumping less risky, more viable, and give the engineer a little bit of that mobility that he very much needs in order to be more effective in competitive settings. And then we're moving on to the engineer's primary weapons. I think that the stats for the shotgun, the Widowmaker, the Frontier Justice, and even the Panic Attack are just fine and dandy as far as balance and utility goes, but the two NG primaries I still have issue with are the Pomson 6000 and the Rescue Ranger. The Pomson is just not a very good weapon. On one end, it has two borderline unfair stats in that it drains Uber from medics and drains Cloak from spies. These stats are not fun to play against in their own right because it removes the abilities of another class, which I don't think should be featured as a statistic in TF2, but coupled with the extremely slow and unreliable projectile, the lower clip size, size and the buggy hitbox associated with it, the Thompson is just a mess and it needs to be redesigned. I suggest making it so the Thompson doesn't do any more of that uber or cloak draining crap and instead put more focus on it being a medium, long-range damage dealer with more straightforward situational uses. I think the projectile should travel much faster and do more reasonable damage at long range, as well as return an old mechanic that used to be on the Thompson, the ability to penetrate players. Basically, I think the Thompson should be nothing more than a shotgun version of the Righteous Bison, or at least the way the Bison used to work. And then this brings me to the very last weapon on my ideal chopping block, the Rescue Ranger. Now, you may already be aware that the TF team very recently posted a blog detailing a few of the weapon changes that they are proposing for the upcoming Jungle Pyro Campaign 3 Boogaloo update, and the only engineer-specific weapon on that list was the Rescue Ranger. And while these changes are in no way final, in fact, the only reason that they're showing them to us before the update drops is so that we can discuss what we do and do not like about what they think should be changed about these weapons. I noticed that a lot of engineer players seem to be upset that the Rescue Ranger is getting a bit of a nerf. But let me reassure you, if this is the actual change that the TF team decides to go through with, then you Rescue Ranger enthusiasts out there are getting off pretty damn easy, because as it stands right now, the Rescue Ranger is definitely one of the most useful defensive weapons in the engineer's arsenal, and while it's been repeatedly directly or indirectly nerfed in every major balance update since Gunmetal, I still think the Rescue Ranger could be taken down a peg. Now, the update that the TF team is proposing is pretty simple. When you heal a building with the Rescue Ranger, you will spend metal at about a 4-to-1 ratio based on the healing done. So if you heal the max heal per bolt, you'll spend 15 metal. At first, this seems like a pretty detrimental change, but to be honest, 15 metal per 60 health is very manageable. It's still better than the ratio when using a wrench, which is 3-to-1, and still being able to heal at a distance is completely worth it. In the end, I'm surprised that they didn't hit this thing harder, because being able to heal a building not only from any distance, but without spending any metal at all, is only one of the main things that make the Rescue Ranger practically a must-use when playing around your sentry gun. A few of the major complaints I've been hearing about the proposed Rescue Ranger nerf is that it will encourage engineers to hog their dispensers more because they will need metal more often, which is a fair point, but decent engineers will be able to still balance putting the dispenser in a place where both their team and they are able to access it easily. However, I do predict that lower skilled engineers will be unable to manage metal as effectively, so I can see it being an issue in the early stages of an NG player's skill progression. That being said, I like that the apparent goal of the proposed Rescue Ranger nerf seems to be to give it a higher skill ceiling, which I approve of. I personally just don't think it will be enough to prevent it from being the quintessential weapon to use when playing on defense. In fact, if I was being honest, I'd go so far to say that this nerf doesn't fix what's so good about the Rescue Ranger. I think that the ability to heal so effectively without taking splash damage or putting yourself in as much danger is what breaks this weapon. So I would suggest lowering the healing per bolt from 60 health to 50 health, in addition to spending a bit of metal based on the amount healed. A few people have suggested healing fall off, which would make it so the further away from the building you are, the less healing the bolt does. But I think that would be counterintuitive and only make it so that you have to be close to your building to get the full value, which at that point you might as well just use your wrench anyway. Well, congratulations, you made it through the horrible nightmare that was your very own uncle roasting the engineer and proposing that he be changed and nerfed and made out to be less of a turtle and more of a helpful little Texan. If you disagree with any of the things I said in this video, feel free to comment about it below. I know for a fact that I'm not 100% right about everything I believe. I'm only one guy, and as much as I am entitled to my own opinion, you're also entitled to yours, so feel free to shout it out. But more important than that, I highly suggest that you take a gander at the proposed balance changes on the TF2 blog. The link will be in the description. And after you've mulled over them a bit, go ahead and send the TF team your thoughts on what they've come up with. The entire purpose of this blog is to actually communicate with us and give us the opportunity to give them feedback on weapon changes before they're already in the game. So make sure you take advantage of the exact thing that we've been asking for years. Make sure your opinion is heard. You have the power to affect the game now. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I will talk to you nieces and nephews next time. Bye-bye.